This video is brought to you by Paragon, my own original sci-fi novel, now available on Amazon. Check the description for links where you can buy. Welcome to Lore Evolution, the show where we examine how our favourite factions, technologies and characters have evolved over the course of their long franchises. Today we're looking at the best Star Trek villains ever created, or at least my personal favourite anyway. The Borg Collective are the ideal foil for the United Federation of Planets. While both factions seek out new life and new civilizations, exploring space to see what's there, their overriding philosophies are completely opposite. While the Federation seeks peaceful cooperation and celebrates diversity, the Borg seek to dominate and destroy individuality. While the Federation has used technology to eliminate poverty, disease and war, the Borg is a perverted distortion of humanity's relationship with technology, creating one of the most iconic bad guys in sci-fi history. While this overall image has been maintained, the details of their culture have slowly evolved since their introduction, although in their original conception, the Borg were something very different. The Borg were created by Star Trek The Next Generation then showrunner Maurice Hurley. He envisioned an epic season-spanning arc where the Enterprise encountered a relentless enemy who could not be negotiated with and were nigh unstoppable. The original big bad for The Next Generation was supposed to be the Ferengi, who were also strikingly different in their first appearance compared to what they later became. However, audiences and fans simply didn't connect with the Ferengi as villains, and so Hurley hatched a new plan. The first hint of the Borg came in the episode The Neutral Zone, where frontier colonies were wiped off the face of planets by forces unknown. This was Hurley's first part in a planned trilogy of episodes to introduce the Borg. However, a writer's strike prevented him from getting the wheels turning. The initial idea was for a race of insectoid-like aliens, but on the 80s TV show budget, it just wasn't feasible. However, the collective hive mind aspect was retained and the Borg were made into a race of cyborg humanoids, hence the name, the Borg. The first appearance of the Borg came in the Next Generation episode Q Who. Hurley collaborated closely with Gene Roddenberry and Rick Berman to bring the Borg to life, with the designs being fleshed out by David Fisher and Rick Sternbach. Costume designer Dorinda Rice Wood drew from H.R. Giger and Lord Dread from the TV show Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future, something which I have never heard of, as inspiration for creating the Borg on set. And finally, it was director Rob Bowman's idea to create the Borg Collective voice made up of thousands of individuals speaking as one. The voices heard in the final episode are that of Hurley, Bowman, and Bowman's assistant. After that, sound designer Francois Blagnan, can you tell I don't speak French, took the audio and made their three voices into thousands, and thus the Borg were ready for their debut. It's intriguing to note in the Borg's initial appearance that they actually don't seem interested at all in assimilating actual people into their collective, and are instead only interested in technology. The Borg are even shown growing new drones from scratch, rather than assimilating others to inflate their numbers. The Borg themselves make no mention of assimilating any biological distinctness throughout the episode and much of the Next Generation. The first instance of the Borg assimilating other people into their collective comes in the Best of Both Worlds when Picard is transformed into Locutus. It's even stated in the dialogue how unusual this is and how the Borg are merely using Picard for his strategic value and as their hot new poster boy for invading the Federation. Throughout the Next Generation, the Borg don't seem to be a faction in the traditional sense of the word. Rather than an ever-expanding collective, the implication is that the Borg are more like marauders, with no set territory. Rather, it seems, per the original colony destructions, that the Borg swooped in, got what they came for, and then moved on. There's a kind of eldritch terror to this version of the Borg which I like. These gigantic ancient spaceships which will show up out of nowhere and wipe out entire civilizations without a care in the world. TNG gives us very little info in terms of the Borg society or where they emerged from. You just have to pray you don't run into them. First Contact gave us a big revamp of the Borg as villains in Star Trek. With a bigger budget, their designs were updated. Deborah Everton, Michael Westmore, and Herman Zimmerman collaborated to head the redesigns, with contributions from Alex Delgado of DS9. Delgado's ideas intrigued me the most. According to Memory Alpha, Delgado's designs were intended to look like assimilation from the inside out rather than the outside in, even toying with things like exposed organs. While Delgado's outlandish ideas were ultimately rejected, the finished Borg are quite different from their TNG depictions. Rather than white skin and black cobbled together tech, Borg skin is made veiny and hairless, with pieces affixed to their head rather than a full helmet. Personally, I'm a little torn on the redesigns. I really liked the simplistic colour schemes in the TNG version. Pale skin and black tech was pretty eerie looking. However, the more alien looking cybernetics and greater level of detail speaks more to the Borg's far off origins. The Borg in First Contact also fully assimilate people, with tubes to inject nanoprobes which then grow augmentations from the inside out. This added bit of body horror is a nice touch. It's super creepy and makes the Borg even more threatening. But easily the most controversial addition to the Borg from First Contact was the Borg Queen. This is something which seems to go against the relentless horde idea of the Borg, presenting a clear weak point, but more importantly, a clear individual inside a collective which is supposed to eliminate that kind of thing. This is a valid criticism, but at the same time, Alice Krige is simply amazing in the part, and delivers a truly brilliant performance, something which was attempted replication in Star Trek Voyager, a show which gets even more interesting for the Borg. Much like early TNG, Star Trek Voyager struggled for a big bad of the show. The original series had the Klingons, TNG had the Romulans, DS9 had the Dominion, but Voyager was trying to make the Kazon interesting. However, by the end of Season 3, they had found their big bad in the Borg. Voyager's depiction of the Borg carries all of the additions from First Contact with a notable colour scheme change. For whatever reason, the Borg in Voyager took on a sickly green motif, something which was introduced in First Contact in a way, but only for their displays and graphics. Despite being introduced in TNG, the Borg only appeared in a grand total of 6 episodes in that show. This was because of the innate power of the Borg as villains. It had to be hard to defeat them. If the Enterprise could beat them every other week, they'd soon lose all their sense of threat. However, the Borg appear in a total of 11 Voyager episodes. It's here even more controversial aspects of the Borg Collective are introduced. It's in Voyager we discover the ins and outs of Borg society. Different classes of drone, different classes of ships, categorized unimatrices, an organized resistance effort, Borg children, transwarp hubs, neural viruses, cross-dimensional conflicts with species 8472, and more. What began as an unknowable, relentless enemy soon took on traits which seemed counter to that initial concept. Now the Borg could be negotiated with. The Borg Queen held vendettas against personal individuals, and the number of potential weaknesses for enemies to exploit has gone up tenfold. Rather than a supremely threatening existential enemy roaming the galaxy to heap untold destruction, the Borg became a complex and malleable cybernetic society. Whether that's a good or bad thing is up to the viewer. Outside of the established TV shows and movies, the Borg have continued to persist in numerous novels, comic books, and video games. In the video game Star Trek Legacy, the Borg were revealed to be created by the motion picture's Voyager entity, something which has never sat right with me. In Star Trek manga, the Borg came about as an extratemporal species, searching for a cure to a devastating disease, and in Star Trek Destiny, a twist emerges revealing the Borg to in fact be a slave race to a disembodied consciousness of an alien who was thrown out of time, then merged with a Mako soldier from the NX-02 Columbia after that ship was ripped out of the 22nd century. And look, this may sound really complicated, but Star Trek Destiny is fucking awesome. You should read those books. Whether you prefer the mysterious cyborg zombies of the Next Generation, or the multifaceted society of Voyager, or one of the many other depictions in other media, the Borg still endure as one of Star Trek's best villains. And with a new post-Voyager show coming our way, perhaps Jean-Luc Picard will once again clash with the Collective. Either way, the evolution of the Borg is far from over. A Miscellaneous Human asks, what other interests do you have that you haven't spoken about before in your videos? There's lots of things really. In general, I'm a student of all kinds of cinema, not just sci-fi. As I announced earlier, I'm currently writing, directing and producing my own horror movie. I love that genre, and some of my favourite filmmakers working today work in that genre. I love sci-fi, but I could also talk for days about action movies, crime shows, fantasy, horror, historical epics. Oh, that's another thing, I'm also a huge history buff. I do so much procrastinating just watching videos about history, like extra credits among other things. I also do MMA on and off, currently off because my club closed down, so I have to find a new place to train. Those are the main things, I guess, aside from video games, which I also really enjoy. If you like my videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date with all my new uploads. I hope my regular viewers enjoyed this pilot episode of sorts for a new video series. You can see videos early on my Patreon for as little as $5 a month. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank my patrons Matthew Androlowitz, David Phelps, Chris Lord, Andy Luke, Larry Bennett, James Vanderhaeg, T. Stoney, and L. Carton. Until next time, have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.